Hey, Lumineers, welcome back to Atlanta. I'm Liam, this is Brandon, and behind us, again, all the action is happening. Still a lot of people here playing Lorcana, playing casually, playing in these events. It's been a great day. And on the competitive side, wow, we're getting down to the wire, huh?
Yeah, we are getting down to the top 4 out of these 2,000 player
2,000 players.
These guys have gone all the way through the Swiss brackets of yesterday, going through the top 64 of today, and we have only 4 people left.
Which is it's incredible to think about. Before we take you to these semifinal matches, I know you're eager to see them, but one of the things that we really like is learning about the people who are playing in these events, following their journey, figuring out how they got here, and we're going to do that with our top 4 players. So first, let's take a look at the top bracket here.
Yeah, so as you can see, we have Joshua Paultre and Alberto Garcia on the left for the semifinals. Joshua playing in Emerald Steel, Alberto playing the Ruby Amethyst. And on the right, we have Zan Seed and Matthew Wright. Zan on Amber Steel and Matthew with Ruby Amethyst. A pretty diverse top 4. There's 2 Amethyst Ruby decks in the final. But other than that, it's a pretty good spread.
Yeah, a bit of variety here, and you'll love to see it. I'm really excited to see the finals, but first we have to get there. So really excited to get in these games. You know, I said we were going to meet these players, and I'm really excited to look at their journey. Let's meet Joshua. Take a look at how he got into the finals. Joshua is coming out of the Elsa bracket, and there he is. You can see where he started, all the way down there on the left, playing into with his Emerald Steel deck into the Ruby Sapphire matchup. That matchup, what do you think about that matchup?
So it's an interesting matchup because usually Ruby Sapphire is doing a lot of ramping early on in the game, and one of the things we've seen with the Emerald matchups is they like to discard cards, and so it can be a little bit difficult for Ruby Sapphire to get their game rolling when Emerald is trying to discard all the cards out of their hand. Usually Ruby Sapphire struggles with their hand size a little bit against something like Emerald Steel. So if I had to guess, I would say it would be a pretty favored matchup for Emerald Steel, and we see the results of that with Joshua moving on into the octofinals, playing against Christopher, playing also a Ruby Amethyst deck. Which I would have to say is also a favored matchup for Joshua, specifically because of that discard ability. If you can get the discard going fast enough against Ruby Amethyst, they have ways to draw cards, but sometimes if you don't find them fast enough, it can be a little bit of an issue, especially since Ruby Amethyst carries quite a few expensive uninkable cards. If you get a bad hand and you have to discard cards or don't find enough ink, sometimes you can just be locked out of playing some of those draw cards anyway. Or if you are drawing 1 or 2 cards per turn and you keep them in your hand, then Joshua playing Emerald can get rid of those cards in your hand that you're drawing anyway.
No, absolutely. And so all 3 matches here against control-style decks, cards that want to work towards the end game where their tools become available. And so that early pressure, whether it's from lore or hand pressure. So yeah, great matchups for Joshua all the way, and it's really paid off for him. You know, we talked with Joshua before he went into this semifinal match, and here's what he said.
Hey everybody, welcome back down to the floor here. I'm with Josh. Going to be going into the top 4 here at the challenge. And Josh, we haven't had a chance to talk to you yet, so I kind of want to hear your impressions on, you've qualified for the North American Championships now. You've locked up one of those golden Mickeys. How are you feeling right now? And is the pressure kind of off now that you've locked all that up?
It absolutely is. I can't say how elated I am. I'm so supportive of my friends and family who, you know, are like so confident, like, oh, he's going to get it. Great. But it definitely feels like the pressure's off. I'm walking home with a Mickey. That feels amazing. And, you know, I've just been having such a good time too. All my opponents have been very, very nice. I love the community that Lorcana is developing. That makes it such a better game for beginners to even get into, and yeah, it's been fantastic. So yeah, I'm excited.
Speaking of fantastic, I absolutely love your deck. You're playing Amber Amethyst, and you have 0 non-characters in your deck, and we know your matchup going into the next round. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, how you feel going into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Amber Amethyst, you know, technically I have no non-characters, so the misses aren't exact. However, the MIM package, obviously, if they be prepared and there's nothing else on board to bounce, those are technically technically 8 misses if you count those. But for the most part, I've played a lot against Ruby Amethyst, so a lot of red purple. It's very back and forth. It can go either way, especially since day 1 was best of 2. I felt a lot of 1-1s with those purples, and right now, that best 2 out of 3, I was lucky to have that top seat, and I got that first play, and I think that made all the difference. So that was fantastic. Obviously, having Mufasas into those Be Prepared feels good, feels confident. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it, but you never know. And if my opponent wins it, I'm super happy for them. We're both walking home champions either way, right? Can't be happy.
I love that attitude. Great attitude. One more thing. Let's say I'm watching at home. I'm watching this match play out. From your perspective, what are the important cards? What's the most important card for you? Most important card for him?
Yeah. So for me, it's going to be trying to get those Cuscos, Rabbits, and Mufasas. All the things that if they die, they just replace themselves. Because I know he's going to go for the removal, probably being reactive. I'm going to also try and speed up that game to get those piglets out a little bit early. Turn 6 is probably the most influential because you want to be aware of the Be Prepared.
Right.
Be prepared for Be Prepared. Everyone keeps saying it. It's still the thing.
It's very well named.
Exactly. So, the Perdita, I really like that loop. My deck's called Dog Droppings because it's funny. You get to bring him back, But, it's just a fun time to be able to just keep bringing back those Cuscos that are those 2 drops that when they die, you draw a card. So it doesn't feel as bad when you're just playing into the Be Prepared that you get those resources back. So that's kind of my goal. Hoping it works out. Yeah. But, that's pretty much all I have to say, I guess, about that matchup.
All right, well, thanks, Josh. Good luck.
Thank you.
And that was Joshua. You can see just how excited he is to have gone past the top 4, or going into the top 4.
Right.
But before he can get on to the finals, he's going to have to take on Alberto Garcia.
Another very strong player.
Why don't we take a look at what Alberto had to go through to get to this point as well? We can see Alberto Garcia there at the very top of the first round playing against Justin, against Justin's Amber Steel deck, and this matchup honestly can go back and forth. A lot of times it depends on what kind of steel song your opponent is playing. If Justin was playing something like Sleepy's Flutes, then Alberto had to really grind through that one because Sleepy's Flutes is usually pretty good into Ruby Amethyst. If it's something more like Lanterns or Pride Lands build of Amber Steel, then I believe Alberto probably had a little bit of an easier time utilizing the tools in Ruby that you have, like Maui and Medusa, and Be Prepared to take care of those large characters that might be played in Amber Steel. And then after that, Alberto Garcia had to play Dalton in the Ruby Sapphire match. We got to cast that earlier, and that was a crazy match that ended quite surprisingly, honestly. It was down to the wire.
Yeah, it was down to the wire, and this is, as we mentioned, Alberto's on this Ruby Amethyst deck, which is kind of a control deck at times, but against the Ruby Sapphire, you really have to take an aggressive line, and Alberto played that game very well, closing out that game in Game 3 with a goat, which fantastic finish. And then moving on to the quarterfinals. Now, he's familiar with Emerald Steel, the match he's about to play, because he just played it, making it through that matchup in the quarterfinals. And we've already talked about this matchup a bit. This is a challenging deck for Alberto to get through, and he's done it once. Let's see if he can do it again.
Yeah, he's going to have to do it again playing into Joshua, so I'm really excited to see that. We also, we talked with Alberto before this match, so we also have an interview with him that we can get to real shortly.
Right now.
Welcome back. We're about to go into the top 4 here with Albert, and you've got a hard matchup coming up in front of you, one that you've been prepared for, though, coming into this weekend. How are you feeling about this matchup in front of you?
A little nervous, honestly, but let's see what the cards say. He has a grandma he's going to play, and then Cindy to exert my character, so I got to watch out for that. Hopefully Maui comes out, or Fox, Crab, to do the job.
Can you point us to one card or one big play that could really swing the matchup in either side?
Well, for him, I think it's Pascal, his Piglet, honestly. For me, hopefully the bounce package does the thing for it, and hopefully Maui again.
Well, you've been pretty good with those goats here this week, and especially a little bit earlier in the tournament, that top deck won. So, Albert, best of luck in the top 4.
Thank you, sir.
Oh my goodness, these are all top-tier Lorcana players playing top-tier Lorcana decks, and they're playing at their best right now. So it's super excited. We can't wait for this match. We have to mention, at this point, the top 16 have all qualified for the Continental Championships. They've also got their serialized Mickeys, but there's still a few things to play for, including the trophy. The beautiful trophy that the first place finisher gets. So at this point, that's what's on the line, as well as some additional boxes and packs where man, there's a lot to play for. So let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into this match. I'm excited to see what happens. All right, so Joshua being the higher seed, it looks like he is going to be able to go first. And already we see a very interesting card. We see a Fairy Godmother being inked. I don't think I've seen that being played in an Amethyst Ruby deck before, to be honest. That is way outside of what I'm used to be honest with you. Looks like we're playing an Amethyst Amber deck is what it looks like we're playing, that Joshua is playing. This could be a little bit tricky for Albert, to be honest with you. Ruby Amethyst usually struggles into a really aggressive Amber Amethyst final deck because they just come out of the gate swinging. They usually play some really aggressive characters, and Ruby Amethyst usually doesn't have a way to interact with those characters while they're readied. Ruby Amethyst struggles a little bit in the beginning. You can, mainly because an Amber Amethyst player can play a pretty wide board, and a lot of times the Ruby Amethyst player are playing bounce cards on turn 2, like Madam M Snake and Madam M Fox, and so it makes it a little bit difficult to deal with these wide boards when you're playing so narrow as Ruby Amethyst.
Absolutely. What an interesting deck. I'm taking a moment to kind of soak this in, looking at the cards he's playing. You know, typically the Amethyst Amber decks, the ones we usually see are hyper aggressive. They're very, they try to build out Lord lead super early. But in this deck we see Mufasa's, Fairy Godmother, some interesting cards. So I'm excited to see what Joshua's game plan here is and how this is going to play out.
Yeah, it's really honestly so exciting to see such an unconventional deck all the way up here in top 4. I mean, if you would have asked me what deck I expected to be in top 4, Amber Amethyst would not be one of them. And this is the second time that we see that Fairy Godmother. Liam, why don't you tell us what this Fairy Godmother does? Yeah,
Fairy Godmother is a 3-cost 3/4 with 1 lore, and her ability is Leave It to Me. Whenever you play a character named Cinderella, you may exert chosen character. So this is a card, you know, if Cinderellas are available that you can use to exert your opponent's characters, but at this point, it's not able to. Yeah, I don't know. We haven't seen this card yet.
No, I'm very
kind of trying to figure it out right now.
To see this, the only Cinderella card that I can think of off the top of my head in either Amethyst or Amber is the single Cinderella 1-cost Singer card.
Right.
But even then, she's only Singer 3. You're not really working in inks that play a ton of phenomenal songs in there, to be honest with you. We do see this shift, Fairy Godmother, though, and I think that one is going to be something to look out for because she can be a really strong card once on board. She can shift for 2. She's an inkable 5-cost 3/4 with 2 lore, and she has an ability that says whenever this character quests, your characters get Challenger +3, and when this character is banished in a challenge, return this card to your hand this turn. So essentially, when Fairy Godmother enters play, you're looking to shift Fairy Godmother so that you can quest that turn, giving the rest of your characters Challenger +3, meaning they'll be able to challenge with an extra 3 strength. And then when they are banished in that challenge, instead of going to the discard pile, they come back to your hand, which is a really interesting take on what is typically a really aggressive ink combo with Amber Amethyst, where you're playing a bunch of small characters, trying to quest as fast as you can. Instead, Joshua is taking...
This is why. This is the payoff for this card.
Yeah, exactly. You see the Mufasa, and this is where we see a combo forming. Liam, why don't you take it and tell us what might be happening?
No, played at the perfect time. We were right about to go into this. I mean, you can see what we were setting up here with the Mufasa. Mufasa is a card. It's a 3/3 that quests for 2, but when it's banished in a challenge, you can look at the top card of your deck, and if it's a character card, you can put it into play for free, essentially replacing the Mufasa. But if that card's been given Challenger and the ability from Fairy Godmother, then it's banished in a challenge. It goes back to your hand, and you get the card off the top of your deck, allowing you to then play the Mufasa again, and you can do some really interesting things.
Yeah, I've never really seen this recycling of Mufasa. It's a very efficient way to get characters onto the board, which I really like. I mean, this is so unique. I'm excited to be seeing this here at such a far point in the tournament, here all the way in the top 8. Who would have expected this? You have Ruby Amethyst, arguably the least exciting deck is the one that we've seen since set 1 just take over the meta of set 2 and still be relevant here in set 3 versus a deck that I haven't seen anybody play before.
No, nope. We've seen a lot of red Fossas. We haven't seen a lot of purple Fossas, so excited to see how this plays out. Another interesting note, you have cards in Amethyst, like the Goat, that gain you something when they enter and leave play. So Fairy Godmother's ability working with the Goat or with the Rabbit or anything like that also allows you to get more value out of those cards. If they're returned to your hand, being banished in a challenge, you can play them again.
Yeah, one of the things that we noticed, there was a single Amber Ruby Mufasa deck that made it into the top 64. And when we were watching that game, we mentioned how in those Mufasa lists, card draw is really an issue. It's difficult if you don't open with the Mother Gothel and the Rapunzel to draw 3 cards and refill your hand. You can really struggle. But when you take out Ruby and you put in Amethyst, you gain this mid-range package of really valuable cards that create a ton of value with cards like Merlin Rabbit and Goat, like Liam just said, cards that you want to see bounce back and forth from your hand and onto the board. And usually that's done through cards like Madam M Fox and Madam M Snake, which we still see some of in Joshua's deck, but he's also potentially going to be able to use the Fairy Godmother to add to that as well.
No, that's absolutely right. Talking about you're right about the limited card draw and getting that mid-range card draw out of it. But the Fairy Godmother, there's another way that allows you to do more with a few cards that you have. If you can play a card, 2 or 3 times, leveraging Fairy Godmother, then and get more value out of that card, maybe the card draw is less of a problem.
I also see a Perdita in Joshua's hand that he was flipping around with, and Perdita is also a pretty interesting Amber card. When it is played and when it quests, you get to bring back a character that costs 2 or less from your discard. Or no, I think it just gets to be played. I can't quite remember. It's one of those two. You either get to play it or bring it back to your hand. Either way, a really strong ability being able to bring cards back from the discard, reuse them over and over again. And we see Joshua, it's paying off. This deck is paying off for him. He's already at 8 lore with Alberto at 3. Alberto's been basically having to respond to everything that Joshua's been playing because he's been playing a bit of an aggressive opening, just gaining lore where he can, playing characters that are really valuable, things like Pascal that keep evasive, Merlin Rabbit that draws you cards. We still have the Mufasa on board. We have another Mufasa in hand, and when the Mufasa gets banished or leaves play, we'll be able to potentially play another card from the top of Joshua's deck as well. And here we see the Perdita doing that, bringing back Cusco from the discard into play. Cusco being a card that when banished gets you to draw a card. And that Cusco, I imagine, won't be the last time that we see him coming into play to help Joshua keep his handful.
No, absolutely not. It's the perfect 2 cost or less character to pull back from your discard pile with Perdita there, because again, giving you that card draw. It's really interesting watching what this deck's doing so far. One note on Mufasa, one thing that a lot of these Mufasa roulette decks like to do is work in a few big characters to give you a really big payoff, and we see a Chernabog there in Joshua's hand. We can assume that there's more than one in this deck, so that Mufasa, when it leaves play, could put something quite large into play. And Brandon, there's the Cinderella.
Yeah, so it looks like Joshua is playing the Cinderellas. After we saw the Shift Fairy Godmother, I thought maybe the other Fairy Godmother was only in there as a shift target for the Floodborn Fairy Godmother, but it looks like that's not true. It looks like Joshua actually is playing Cinderella, and I can kind of understand it. There aren't a plethora of 3 cost or lower songs in Amber and Amethyst that you usually see play, but you still have cards like Friends on the Other Side that you could potentially sing with Cinderella on turn 2. And it looks like that's going to wrap up the game 1, and Joshua just sort of took that one over.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I do want to talk about that Cinderella combo again, though, because I think you're right earlier, because these Mufasa decks don't want to run a lot of songs at all, because that Mufasa is really dependent on hitting a character on the top deck. And so I think one of the reasons that Cinderella is in there, obviously, is for the Fairy Godmother, but it pairs really well with Perdita. These colors do not have a lot of removal. There's not a lot of damage, or there's not a lot of cards that remove your opponent's characters from the board. So what it's relying on are cards that it can exert your opponent's characters to make them targets for your challenges. And that's what Cinderella can do when paired with that Fairy Godmother. But when Perdita can pull Cinderella back from the discard pile over and over again, it makes it easy to reuse. So there's just a ton of cards here which are allowing you to to replace themselves or get maximum value out of the cards in this deck.
Yeah, I love the Perdita engine that lets you bring those cards back. And man, so I was wrong. I didn't see the Be Prepared that Albert had played. The game's not over, but there were enough characters in the discard for Joshua to be able to drop this absolute bomb, Chernabog, a 9/9, I believe, with 3 lore. Chernabog is his cost is discounted for every character card in your discard pile. So it makes it really efficient for you to be able to play him. And then when you do play him, you have to shuffle all of your character cards back into your deck. So I'm starting to see a theme here in Joshua's deck where you're using Mufasa to get cards out onto the board, using Perdita to bring back valuable cards from your discard. You're using the characters in your discard to use the Chernabog, and you're using Fairy Godmother to make the most efficient, to make the characters as efficient as you can on board by challenging other characters and bringing them back to your hand so that you can replay them also.
Absolutely. We did see the Fairy Godmother Cinderella combo go off there, but to little effect because Rafiki was unexerted immediately.
Yeah, and Joshua is putting Albert in a Be Prepared or Buzz situation. It looks like Albert has the Be Prepared to get rid of it again. Joshua being at 15 lore and Albert at 8. Albert is just trying his best to keep Joshua from winning, honestly, keep Joshua from putting too many characters on board. But here we see it again, the Perdita come out, dragging another 2 cost or less character, in this case Cinderella, back onto the board. Albert just got rid of all those characters, and here's Perdita bringing them right back.
Bringing him right back from the discard pile. Over on Albert's side, unfortunately, not a lot of cards in hand. He's had to use a lot of his answers already, and not a lot of card draw available. So he's looking for things to deal with this. But with 15 lore, every single lore now on Joshua's side of the board matters, and so he's going to have to consistently find the cards he needs to prevent questing. Here we have a Queen's Castle come on the board. This is a 4-cost card with 2 lore. It has an ability for every character that you put there, you get to draw an extra card at the start of your turn. But in this instance, nothing to put there, but it will give him lore at the start of each one of his turns, unless Joshua wants to remove it.
Yeah, I really don't like this Queen's Castle from Albert, to be honest from you. Not for any reason other than it's just a really slow play because it's not getting rid of any of the characters on Joshua's board. He's already at 18 lore. He has the Perdita where he can bring back another character. In this case, he brings back Madam M. Snake to bounce the Cinderella back to hand after questing with her. And it's unless Albert has a way to banish everything on board, he's not going to have this game. Mufasa would even bring another character on board, even if you were able to get rid of the Mufasa also. And it looks like Joshua has the goat in hand anyway, being at 18 lore. So that is going to be game 1 going to Joshua. And I'll be honest, that deck took me by surprise.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. If you're like us, we had to spend, and you heard it, we had to spend the first few minutes figuring out what this deck was trying to do. A lot of cards we haven't seen at all over the last few days, and a lot of unconventional cards. But what an engine. What a way to make maximum use of every single card in your deck that Joshua had there. So, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like Joshua had constructed a deck in which he could use basically everything. Like, you would think that some of these cards don't synergize with each other very well, right? Like, you're playing Perdita to get cards out of your discard back onto the field, but you're also playing Chernabog that wants to have characters in your discard, and even when played, puts characters back into your deck. But he seems to have created this almost loop or like engine that you've talked about, where you're playing the Mufasa to get characters out on board, and then those characters are being banished, and Perdita can bring them back. And then as they're being banished, you can play the Chernabog, and you can just sort of adapt your game plan to whatever board state you're at. So I'm very eager to see how Joshua pilots this deck in game 2 when he's on the draw.
Absolutely. Now, Albert has answers here. He has ways to play around. I think, unfortunately, he didn't hit a lot of his card draw, but we'll see if he gets it this game. I'm really fascinated to see what game 2 looks like.
Yeah, let's get into game 2. So I'm wondering what Albert is even thinking of here. Like we said earlier, Joshua is playing a deck that I'm really completely unfamiliar with. We can see the engine that's going on, and Joshua seems to be playing a little bit more of an aggro mid-range list with a heavy top end, something like Chernobog. So I think if I was Albert, I would be playing a pretty aggressive opening myself, and honestly just going with the same Ruby Amethyst game plan that you normally see, which is just be as aggressive as you can on the opening and close out with cards like Merlin Goat when it might be a little bit more difficult for your characters to gain much value.
No, I think that's right. Anytime you're playing Amethyst, you once you get to 16, 17, 18 lore, especially when you have bounce cards available, you're within striking distance of winning the game. So I do think Albert should be thinking about, or is probably thinking about, pushing his lore as much as he can early, forcing Joshua in a position where he has to respond to Albert's board state and can't quest on his own. And that'll allow Albert to get to a place in the game later on where a lot of his answers are available. It is important that he hits his card draw in the mid game, though, perhaps a rabbit or a castle that he can start leveraging to get extra cards to draw into those answers, though.
Yeah, I'll also be interested if we see Albert start bouncing his cards with Mim and Fox, because as you mentioned in Game 1, Amber and Amethyst don't have great removal tools, at least for cards that are readied. They really rely on being able to play cards that exert other cards so that they can be challenged and banished. But if Albert is able to play his cards in a way where he's playing them, questing with them, and then picking them back up with something like Madam Mim Snake or Madam Mim Fox, and then being able to replay them so that they're ready, it may be really difficult for Joshua to respond when he's in this situation where he's on the draw, so he's in a position of needing to respond to Albert first.
Absolutely. Chernobog's Minion's a great tournament play for Joshua. He can respond to the Rafiki questing if he wants to, or it's another one-drop that makes complete sense in this deck. You can quest with Chernobog's Minions, and when you do, you can banish it to draw a card, putting it in your discard pile, but available to come back with a Perdita.
Yeah, it can come back for a Perdita, and it's also helping discount your big Chernobog in your hand if you don't want to bring it back with Perdita. Then either option is great, right? Because if you bring it back, you can quest and banish it again to draw another card, and you can just kind of keep that loop going with Perdita. When you're finally ready to play the Chernobog, you can banish it and keep it in your discard to discount the Chernobog by one more ink cost. And already it seems like we see Albert responding to Joshua in what he is playing.
Interesting. So Albert definitely going with the go wide, more aggressive strategy, getting a lot of characters on board early, and trying to push that lore total a little bit. Joshua expecting that might be the game plan, removing the Rafiki, not letting it quest for free in perpetuity, and then Albert responding by removing that Chernobog's Minions, not letting him get the card draw off of it, perhaps in the next turn. As a downside to that, that mini wasn't available to quest, but here Albert with much better control of the board after this turn.
Yeah, and to be honest, I know we talked about how difficult it might be for Joshua to respond to Albert, but if Joshua can just put himself in a place where Albert is having to respond to him, I think Joshua is just in a better place because of this engine that he has where he can adapt to whatever is happening in the game, whether a bunch of characters are being sent to his discard that he can pull back with Perdita, or he can play a Chernobog because of the amount of characters in his discard, or if he is gaining some sort of advantage and he wants to keep Albert from trying to do something like play Be Prepared by playing Mufasa, so that when Mufasa gets banished, Joshua can play another card off the top of his deck. Joshua, I mean, this whole deck feels like it's just going to be constant pressure all the time, and it's going to take Albert, he's going to have to be really careful about when he puts the pressure on, when he's questing, when he's gaining or pushing his win condition, and then how he's responding to Joshua so that he's not feeding the game plan that Joshua is working on at that moment.
Absolutely. I will say here it is important that the rabbit came out turn 4, highlighting that mid-game card draw. That rabbit gains a card or gives you a card when it enters play, and then when it leaves play, you also get to draw a card, netting you 2 cards. Albert put a lot on the board early, went pretty wide, reducing his hand size, and those are the cards that he also needs to ink. So getting a few extra cards here is important and will allow him to keep going.
Absolutely, and we see Joshua cleaning up the board state just a little bit, using the crab to banish the Maleficent, and using the Cusco to banish the Mini, and Cusco being banished, being able to draw a card, and then Joshua doing the exact same thing that Albert is doing, playing a rabbit on turn 4 to draw a card. We do see a Maui come out from Albert. Now he has Rush and Reckless. It's an inkable 5-cost 6/5, so it can banish quite a few things, and because it has Reckless, it has to challenge if able, and because it has Rush, it's able to challenge the turn that it's played. So we see it go straight into this Merlin Crab, which I think is worth doing because Merlin Crab has an ability that gives a character challenge 3 on play and when it leaves play. So if you can, you want to remove Crab on your turn if you're playing against it, so that your opponent can't use that Challenger +3 against you. And we see a great response by Joshua here, just playing a Mufasa, saying, I know you don't want this on board, but if you remove it, I'll be able to hopefully find a character from the top of my deck and just replay something else.
Yeah, it's important to note we're now into turn 6. Albert now has several removal options opened up to him that can deal with that Mufasa, from Mana Medusa, Lady Tremaine at 6 ink. And so Joshua, knowing that, plays it, perhaps hoping to get something good off the top deck. You know, these decks are often referred to as Mufasa roulette decks because you never know what you're going to get off the top deck. And I'm always excited to see what's pulled when that card's banished.
Yeah, I'm really, I'm having so much fun watching this match, watching Joshua pilot this deck, because it's so new, and it just goes to show to anybody listening that you don't have to follow what everybody else is telling you. You know, I don't think I've heard a single person mention Amber Amethyst in regards to bringing it to this 2,000 player tournament. Joshua seems to have cooked up this deck that has a really great engine running and is having serious success with it. We can see just how difficult of a position it puts your opponents in with the way he's playing Perdita and Mufasa. And I just think it's awesome to see such a unique deck all the way up here in the top 4.
There goes that Rabbit banishing Mufasa, giving Albert a card, but also giving a Floodborn Fairy Godmother Joshua off the top deck.
We see another Maui coming down, getting rid of that Fairy Godmother, saying, I don't want you to get the value off of the Fairy Godmother. I don't want you to give your characters Challenger and then give them the ability to bounce back into your hand when they're banished in a challenge.
Joshua also, I'll note, every time something goes into a discard pile, he does a quick count, takes a look at what's in there, counts the number of characters available there for a very important reason.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a Chernobog sitting in his hand right now, and that is why he is counting up. And look, right there, we have a very beautiful enchanted Chernobog in his hand. He's counting to see how much ink he has and how many characters he has in play, wondering if it's worth to play down the Chernobog right now, because, I mean, Chernobog is a very difficult card to get rid of. We talk about how great Ruby is at banishing other characters, but if we're honest, a lot of that is kind of conditional. A card like Madame Medusa that has seen a ton of play in the set 3 meta, and I would say a meta-defining card, is usually really strong, but she only banishes cards with 3 strength or less, and Chernobog is a whopping 9/9 character. So outside of something like a Be Prepared, there's not usually any other great answers to such a large card in Ruby Amethyst.
No, that's absolutely right. There's an interesting game going on here when it comes to the removal, where we're at turn 7 now. So Albert has we see 2 Be Prepared in his hand, and Joshua knows that in turn 7 Be Prepared are an option. Albert has probably drawn aggressively to get those, and probably altered his hand aggressively to find at least one, seeing how many characters were on board last game. So Joshua has to put enough on board that he draws out the Be Prepareds and gets them played on his terms, putting characters on the board that he doesn't mind being banished. For example, Kuzco, which will give him a card, or Mufasa, which will give him a card off the top deck, but he has to put enough pressure there to have Albert play it when he wants him to play it.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about this that Joshua's doing such a good job of doing is he's forcing Albert to play these Be Prepareds with these white boards. We saw the Piglet that was going to quest for 3 lore. Mufasa was going to quest for 2 lore. And he's playing characters like Mufasa and Kuzco, like you said, that gain a benefit off of being banished, but it's just too much lore on board for Albert to ignore. And on top of that, when Albert plays such a big card like Be Prepared to put all of these cards in his discard, we can see Joshua counting it again. It is just further discounting that Chernobog that's sitting in his hand.
And there it is, the second Be Prepared. You know, Joshua knew Albert probably had 1. He didn't know if he had 2. Now we know he did. So clearing the board again there, and no immediate benefit from Mufasa there. So Joshua starting with a blank board, but here comes Perdita, and when Perdita comes into play, we always see something that comes with it.
Yeah, we'll see if Joshua decides to play anything with the Perdita. Looking at his discard currently, he's going to decide to...
Not.
Okay, he's taking a second. I know we have a Piglet. I think we have a Kuzco in there as well, also a Pascal. So he has quite a few options. He could bring the Piglet back if he wants to try to push for some lore. Piglet gains an extra 2 lore when there are 2 other characters on board. So that would be an interesting thing to push for extra lore. You could obviously bring back a Kuzco if you wanted to guarantee a little bit more draw. But it looks like Joshua's going to bring back the Piglet and push for that lore. Oh, yes.
And he still has enough for the Chernobog.
Love this play.
Oh, my goodness. Now, he's saying, Albert, do you have a third Be Prepared?
Yeah, he is pushing so much lore with this board. 3 lore off of the Chernobog, 3 lore off of the Piglet, and 2 lore off of the Perdita. It's going to give him 8 lore in one turn unless Albert is able to respond with a Be Prepared. And it looks like he doesn't have it. He's just playing the rabbit. But I love this because, like I said, Piglet is going to quest for 3 when there's 2 other characters on board. Perdita can bring cards back from the discard. And rather than playing something like the Cusco with the Perdita, he said, you know what, I'll bring back the Piglet, the thing that's going to push my win condition, and then I'm going to shuffle all those, before I shuffle all of those cards, back into my deck when I play my Chernobog for free.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Chernobog is just so big, and there's so many characters on board that a lot of the traditional removal options for Ruby aren't really available. Madame Medusa requires a character that's 3 or less strength, and then Lady Tremaine requires you to banish a character. But if you have so many on board, Piglet becomes an easy choice, perhaps, leaving Chernobog up and able to quest. So at one point, it looked like Joshua asked the number of ink that Albert had on board, and I'm wondering if he wanted to see if he had 9, if Maleficent was an option to deal with that Chernobog, because it really is the only removal answer right now to deal with that Chernobog, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of Ruby Amethyst players aren't even playing Maleficent Monstrous Dragon in their decks because Ruby Amethyst is leaned a little bit more mid-range and tempo-oriented rather than control. So Albert may not even be playing that card, but I think you're right. It's one of the few cards that could get rid of the Chernobog. The only other one that I can think of is Lady Tremaine, but that requires basically every other card on Joshua's side of the board to be banished so that Joshua is forced to choose the Chernobog on Lady Tremaine's ability. And other than that, it's Be Prepared. We've already seen 2, maybe 3 Be Prepareds at this point from Albert.
2 at least.
So he's definitely running out of steam here. And as you can see, Albert started with 6 lore early in the game, but right now Joshua is looming over him with a ton of lore and only 3 lore currently on board for Joshua. But, I mean, that's a total of 9 lore total that he could quest with in one turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, these matches just are so tense, you know, and we also should mention they're untimed at this point, you know, with the tournament organizers understanding that each player wants to think very carefully about each play, making sure they're making the optimal play, and giving each player the maximum opportunity to find the line that will get them out of the current situation they're in.
Absolutely. We want the best player to win at the end of this, and so we don't want the players to feel rushed and accidentally make a misplay. We want these people to think through all of the lines they possibly can. And you can see Albert doing so currently, trying to decide if he wants to challenge something with Rabbit, potentially seeing a card that he has in hand instead. I mean, this is a really tough board state for Albert right now. You're going to have to deal with the Chernobog and the Perdita and the Piglet. He decides to challenge the Piglet. Piglet is threatening 3 lore a turn, so I absolutely understand that. The Rabbit is only going to take 2 damage, so you're not going to get the card draw off of the Rabbit from the challenge when it leaves play, which isn't the worst thing in the world because that could create a 2-for-1 scenario in the future. But Albert has a lot of ink that he still can use. I don't know what's in his hand currently. He seems to be looking at his discard to see what his options are.
Yeah, he's thinking long and hard about this. I think, you know, if he is drawing for answers, you know, obviously Be Prepared is one that he would love to see again now. You know, the alternate play with the Rabbit is to send it into Chernobog, perhaps get a card if you really need to draw a card. If he thinks he can draw this game out another turn and survive until he gets the opportunity to draw again, removing that Piglet may be the way to do it. But gosh, just really agonizing over this decision.
Yeah, and we can see the update to the lore down at the bottom. Albert only at 6, and Joshua, I thought there was a mistake there.
Yeah,
Joshua
behind a little bit.
Joshua had pushed up to 11 lore in one turn. He was sitting at only 3, and then he was able to quest for quite a bit more with the Chernobog and the Piglet there.
I think that would have been game. It would have been 9.
Yeah, it would have been 9. And so, like, I mean, Joshua almost has the game on board, and I don't even know if we've seen a single goat from Joshua either. So he's playing Amethyst, and you know, we've seen it plenty of times when all they have to do is get close to 20, and then a few Merlin goats can finish the game.
Friends from the other side drawing 2 cards. Look for some answers here.
Okay, Albert does find the Madame Medusa to get rid of the Perdita, which is pretty good because that means Perdita will not be able to get the Piglet back from the discard this next turn, threatening 3 lore again. That's one of the challenges playing against Joshua's deck is every time you banish a character, it feels like it's not actually gone. It feels like it can come back at any moment.
Until I see you again.
Yeah, exactly. Either through Perdita or just Chernobog, shuffling them all back into the deck to eventually be drawn.
Rapunzel gifted with healing coming down. A set 1 card very popular that allows you to heal a character for up to 3 damage and draw a card for each damage counter you remove.
We see a Merlin Crab coming into play just to push even more lore. Looking at 7 lore this turn, or for next turn on Joshua's end, which would be game. So Albert really has to find an answer, find a way to get Joshua under 6 lore on board. And I think that's going to be a real feat because you really need to get rid of the Chernobog or you have to get rid of a bunch of other characters.
You really do. It's really the Chernobog. Even if you get rid of 2 of the 1 lores or even you get rid of the 2 lore character. Yeah, this is tough.
Albert's going to start by challenging the Fairy Godmother, getting 1 lore off of the board. Now Joshua only has 6, but that still is going to get him to 20 the next turn. So Albert needs to find a way to take out 1 more card.
We have 6, I was going to say a Lady Tremaine or a Medusa. There it is. So only 4 lore represented on the board now. This will draw this game out another turn at the very least.
And Joshua does not currently have a goat in hand, at least not that I can see. So now that we're under the 20 lore mark, I mean, the game's not over, but Albert has a lot of climbing back to do if he wants to take this game. One other thing that I think Ruby Amethyst struggles with in this matchup is Ruby Amethyst has a lot of removal, has a lot of ways to deal with the board, and it's very difficult for them to get rid of something like a Chernobog. But even when you do get rid of the cards, they're not gone forever, it seems like. They go to the discard and they can be brought back, and so eventually Ruby Amethyst is going to run out of ways to remove these characters, and unless Albert can find a way to put pressure on himself and end the game before Joshua gets away with it, Joshua's just going to be able to continue to play these cards over and over and over until Albert runs out of options.
Oh dear. Albert returning a Madame Medusa to his hand to play the Madame and Fox, probably as a way to get Madame Medusa back, running the Fox into Chernobog to put some damage on it, but playing right into Joshua's hands as Joshua was sitting with the Rapunzel, waiting to remove that damage to draw 3 more cards, giving him way more options at the end game here.
Yeah, and one thing that Joshua's doing a great job at is he is only playing enough characters. He's playing enough characters that it makes it difficult for Albert to deal with completely, and we see it right there that Albert was not able to get rid of Joshua's board there, and Joshua takes it. He's going on to the finals.
What a deck.
Who would have thought that the Amber Amethyst Mufasa Perdita Chernobog deck was going to be in the finals of the very first Disney Lorcana Challenge in North America, where just about 2,000 participants came to play. Some of the best Lorcana players in North America.
Yeah, I mean, this deck is just so fun. We talk about value. Every card in this deck serves multiple functions. It can be brought back. It can go to your discard pile to do something else. It goes to the discard pile to put Chernobog in play. Mufasa bringing it. It all does so much. I'm excited to see in the finals.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be really exciting. It feels like Joshua's deck really could do everything. It could adapt to whatever scenario it was in. If your characters were being put in the discard pile, you're discounting your Chernobog so you can play later, or you're giving yourself something that Perdita can bring back. If they're not going into the discard pile, or you're shuffling things back into your deck, you can play your Mufasas to get those characters back out on board. I would love to see if our next finalist can figure out how to take this deck down.
So who is our next finalist going to be?
That's a good question. Maybe we should look at the brackets of the next match.
Yeah. And we're going to send it over, I think, to Rebekah and Jonti to get a look at those brackets and to take a look at the semifinal match. So
after this quick break.
Yeah.
Okay.